Protesters here tell me they are not happy with Governor Lamont extending his emergency order. They want the governor to know they are fighting for Connecticut to fully reopen. Outside the governor's home, members of the CT Liberty Rally organization protesting Governor Lamont's latest move, extending his coronavirus emergency powers for 5 more months.
I don't feel that the statistics warrant a second emergency order.
Extension of those powers would be profoundly unlawful. He will continue to exceed his authority.
The state of emergency means dozens of COVID restrictions impacting businesses and schools can continue. A limit on social gatherings will remain, and post-travel self-quarantine could last as well. Organizers of the protests say the COVID regulations are hurting business owners, landlords, and families.
We've been under lockdown and executive order for 6 months, and people are fed up with it. And we have decreasing infection rates, decreasing death rates, and we want the executive orders to end today.
Wednesday, Republican lawmakers firing back at the governor, saying he extended his emergency powers without their input.
The broad nature of these executive orders has included public health, the economy. We need to sit down with the governor, his office, and the legislature on both sides and have a comprehensive conversation as to how we should move forward.
Governor Lamont defending his decision.
I welcome everybody's input, but rather than make it into more of a political process, I think what I'd love to do is lead with the science and then keep the legislature involved closely all along the way.
The state's current public health emergency was set to expire next Wednesday, but with this extension, it will now expire on February 9th. Reporting in Hartford, Tania Maldonado, Fox 61 News.